Hey there, and welcome to Inside Intercom. I'm Liam Geraghty. Today, our guest is Alex Delivet, the founder of Collect, a platform that helps businesses collect and manage client documents. Alex also founded B2B Rocks, a tech conference dedicated to B2B and SaaS startup. In our conversation today, Alex talks about what he learned from founding his first company, especially when things didn't go according to plan. He sheds light on the evolution of the SaaS startup scene in France, and we chat about document and data collection and why the future will involve fewer documents and more direct, automated connections between platforms. So let's get things started and head over to our podcast studio to meet Alex Delivet. Alex, you're very welcome to the show. We're delighted to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me. And in your office.
Yeah. I think you're only the second person since COVID started who's come into the Intercom podcast studio here in the Dublin office. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I'd love to talk a little bit about your journey in your career to date, and where did your interest in SaaS and tech come from in the first place?
Well, tech, when I was a teenager, I started coding. It was a little bit too late to have the .com period. So I was passionate about tech and coding also at this time. And then I would say I forget this love for nearly 7 to 10 years. And eventually, I would say 5 years after the beginning of my career, I decided to go back to tech. I felt that it was very interesting. And so I started the first startup called TripXP, which was a marketplace for activities, like what Airbnb does right now with activities. But, we did all the mistakes that you can make.
Well, that's what I totally want to ask you all about this because, so this was the first company that you founded,
yeah.
Am I right? So, what was that like, just from an experience point of view of just setting something like that up?
It was, at this time, so it was in 2011 or 12, startup were not such a thing in France or in Europe. And so we had very good press cover, lots of things, but in the end, we didn't really know how to build a real startup. And so I would say, I told you, I made lots of mistakes, include, for example, doing that with partners that were not full-time. None of us had technical skills. We used, an agency to build a product. And I would say, and the biggest one, because you could go through those mistakes, but the biggest one was that the economics of this kind of business were not good. So even if we did a great job, in the end, it couldn't become a real and sustainable business. So, yeah, that's why we decided to close it.
I suppose you probably learned a lot from all of that.
Yeah. Well, one of my biggest learning was about the importance of having technical skills internally, because when we realized that the business couldn't be a sustainable business, so I was the CEO of the company, I was looking for solution. And at some point I was like, okay, maybe we could pivot and become a SaaS for the activity professional that need something to manage their activity, their business. One of their problems was that they could post activities on lots of different platforms, but in the end, I would say the publication was not really the problem. The real problem was to know that each platform did this kind of performance. If you want to update your agenda or your calendar, you can do it all at once. And so we thought about doing this pivot, but it was impossible in our setup. So, and then I was like, okay, never ever, never again, never again.
So where do you go after that experience? What is the next step?
Well, actually, at this time, I was blogging. You remember when we had our personal
yes.
blog, and so I was blogging, and I saw an event in the US organized by 500 startups about B2B companies. And I thought it was interesting, and I posted a blog post saying at the end, should we do the same in France or in Europe. And some people told me, yeah, if you do that, I would attend to the event, or I would love to speak at the event. And so I decided to launch this event. And so it was called B2B Rocks, and I launched it in 2013. From there, I met the guy at eFounders, famous startup studios. Well, I would say specialized in SaaS. I worked with them in 2014 and 15, some events in the meantime. And in 2016, I did a big one for me in France. And I also launched it in Sydney. But in the end, I wanted to launch a new SaaS. And I don't know if you know, but organizing an event is like very time consuming. You need to focus on that like for months.
Yes. Yeah. And what was the landscape like, in France before that, when people were saying like, hey, if you put this event on, I'll come and say, was there very little by way of B2B or SaaS events?
Yeah, I think it was a little in France, and it was also little in Europe or worldwide. When you look, for example, at the MarTech landscape, I don't know if you know this landscape, but I think at this time there were probably maybe 500 SaaS in the world, maybe not in the world, but famous SaaS.
Yeah.
Now there are like 5,000 or even more.
Yeah.
So it was not the same landscape.
Yeah. And like you say, events is such a hard slog. And you were kind of pretty much doing this all on your own.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. How did you sleep?
I don't know. And actually, a few days before the last event that I organized, I was like, okay, what's happening if I can't do it?
Yeah.
I don't have any team, so nobody to do that. So yeah, it was too stressful for me.
What I suppose, like, it must have been a great kind of place to get insights, to have all these people who hadn't the opportunity to speak, and suddenly they're all coming together, like to, impart their wisdom. Like it must have been a great place to pick up all sorts of insights.
Yeah. And what I loved by organizing those events was doing the preparation call. Basically, I had a call with all the speakers to define what could be the interesting topics and so on. And that's, I would say, what was the most interesting for me. And fast forward, I think that's one of the reasons I launched a podcast in French called SAS Connection, because I wanted to keep this kind of contact with SaaS founders.
So when you came to the end of that, so you sold B2B Rocks.
Yeah, I sold it to a VC firm that was pretty unknown in France. I think it was a good VC firm, but they were not as famous as it could be. And so I was in touch with them, and they told me, it could be a good asset for us. So we would be, I would say, in the center of this ecosystem at least once a year. And so they decided to buy it and to do new events again. And then, I think they did it for 2 or 3 years, and COVID hits. And so after COVID, I would say the production team was not in the company anymore. So they were like, okay, should we go or not? They called me back. Do you want to buy it back? And I was launching the podcast, so I told them it makes no sense for me to do that again. But I did the introduction with the new buyer, which is called Advisor. Well, Advisor is kind of G2 or Capterra competitor, not only in French, but mostly in French. And so it made lots of sense for them to buy it and to organize the event again. And so they did the first one in Montpellier this year.
We talked a little bit about what the scene looked like when you set up the conference in the first place. Like, what does it look like now? You know what I mean? Like, you were back then kind of at the very kind of like start of it, the melting pot, like as it was coming together. And like you said, the difference between, the names of SaaS companies you would have known then has like, exploded. So, but what does it look like in France at the minute?
Now, I think the SaaS startups are pretty good. We've got good ones. We've got some good SaaS coming from eFounders, but also maybe you've heard of Station F, which is the largest incubator, I think, in the world. Like, there are 30,000 square meters. So it's really huge.
It's big.
Yeah. So I think it helps lots of SaaS, and there were lots of, I would say, opportunities. And there are also very good VC firms in Paris. We are pretty close to London also and to the US. So right now, the good SaaS can be funded also by US funds or funds coming from the UK. So I think it's pretty solid right now.
Yeah, great. No, that's good to hear.
And I think also one of our particularity is we've got lots of SaaS in the growth industry. So I don't know why, but we've got lots of SaaS, for example, like Phantom Buster, Lemleys, like Grosse Machine, this kind of stuff of startups to automate all the connection on LinkedIn and so on. And I don't know why it seems to be something that is pretty French. French and US. So yeah.
Great. And so Collect, then where did the idea for it come from? Like what sparked it?
Well, the idea came like a long time ago from a personal need. When I was organizing B2B Rocks, I was in touch with lots of people, including speakers, partners. So I needed to collect lots of things, the bio, the photo, the logos, and so on.
I bet it gets messy.
Yeah, and it was always the same. You're sending reminders, and then everybody's sending you the assets on the due date or even after. And so it was a real problem for me. I tried to automate it with forms, Zapier, and so on, but I couldn't really find a solution. So I was like, okay, let's do that. But at the beginning, I was like, okay, it could be helpful for all the industries. And so I did probably the biggest mistakes in terms of marketing, which is not to be focused on one specific use case. And so for nearly 2 or 3 years, it was like very, very broad. And right now, I would say I'm more feeling what the real needs, what are the different opportunities. And also, I know, for example, the industries that I don't want to work with, and others where I want to double down. So, yeah.
So how would you describe it? Like for someone listening in, like how would you define Collect at the minute?
So I would say I will do 2 pitches. The first one is Collect until now, and the second one is Collect in a few weeks. So until now, Collect is a document collection platform. So basically, and mostly, we are collecting documents and data from our clients. Let's take an example. You're buying an apartment and your realtor, they will need to collect lots of documents to prepare everything. And so they could send you an email, but it will be quickly messy. Or they can use Collect and have everything in one place. They can approve and reject specific documents. And we are not only accepting documents, but also data using forms. So this is, I would say, the pitch until now. Now, I would say our bigger vision, but also more specific, is to focus on customer onboarding. And I would say mostly for SaaS. I see more and more SaaS and also vertical SaaS that needs to get documents, data, and also kind of a project management to onboard their customers. Yeah. And so the idea is to be the platform to do that.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And you mentioned there, like, data. And so like, obviously security and compliance are, is going to be a big part of that. So, and I want to talk a little bit about that and knowing your customer and like, where does that come in? Why is that important?
Well, I think why it's important to know their customers. You mean?
Yeah.
Well, this is not something new, but I think it always exists, but it was not considered as important as today. There are different reasons. One of them is most of the time you're not in contact personally with your customers. So if you're a business online, then you don't really know who is at the opposite way. So you don't really know if it's fraud or not. So you need to check that because you don't want to be screwed up, but also because of regulation. And more industries are concerned by this. So also, I think that, for example, if you jump back maybe 7 or 8 years ago, fintech was nearly not a word. And at this time, it was very unclear what you're supposed to do or not. Now it's becoming very clear and everywhere. So I think that while AML, KYC, and so on are, I would say, concerning more and more businesses.
Yeah, and it's, I suppose, like you said, like it's just expected now, you know, in a way that it hadn't been.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying that we are repositioning, even if we can really help lots of business to do KYCs, we're not the best one for this. Because, for example, you've got other SaaS that also does, I would say, fraud recognition, automated, which will be connected to databases and so on. We're not. We're just here right now to collect the documents and to give them to a human, which will say if it's valid or not. So, well, I mean, we are facilitating what can be done right now by email, but it's not as perfect as
it could be.
Yeah. So that's also one of the reasons we are trying to move to the customer onboarding, which makes more sense for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, well, you know, customer due diligence, you know, is a big part of the knowing your customer, you know, kind of area. And I suppose what types of customer due diligence, you know, what are the types and when should businesses be using them?
Yeah, I think, well, most of the time it's their partners that are requiring this kind of document. So, for example, let's say a SaaS that does a point of sale system, they will probably work with payment gateway. And so the payment gateway will require these kind of documents. And these kind of documents, it could be the ID of the manager, it can be the registration documents. So this is the kind of document that are collected using Collect.
In terms of the future of like data compliance, you know, what do you think the future looks like for it?
I think it will be more and more, I would say, frictionless, because we already see that for different types of documents. For example, for banks, some mortgage brokers, they are not expecting, you know, bank statements as PDF, but they will ask you, okay, can you connect your bank account? So directly to the bank. And it can be the same, for example, for taxes. So I think the future in terms of document collection will be less and less, I would say, real documents and more connections. But this is for, I would say, only for the KYCs. But it will stay the same, for example, for customer onboarding, because if you are a point of sale system, then you will probably need to get the menu from the venue. You will probably need to get the internal map or the logo. And this is kind of thing that can't be done in another way than collecting documents.
Well, I was going to say, you know, do you have any big plans kind of for the rest of the year, next year? But I suppose it's this change in Collect, this...
Actually, already a big plan.
Yeah.
The other one that we have already started is the integration. So right now we have, I would say, a very good integration with HubSpot CRM. And so the idea is directly from your CRM, you can send a request to your customers in one click and validate everything into your CRM. So we need to finish it and to close the loop. So when everything is collected, to be able to re-inject them in the CRM. And so the plan also is to launch that on different CRM. So, Pipedrive and Salesforce and so on.
Brilliant. And so where can people kind of keep up to date with all of that? Where can they find you online? Are you on Twitter?
Yeah, so they find us online at usecollect.com. Well, the name is Collect, but the URL is Use Collect. Yeah, I've got lots of customers that say, we are using Use Collect. So it's usecollect.com. We do have a Twitter account, Use Collect, and my personal account is Alex D on Twitter. And we are also on LinkedIn, of course.
Perfect. Well, I'll put all those links in the show notes and on the blog post for anyone to find. But Alex, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Liam.
I hope you enjoyed my chat with Alex Delivet. That's it for this week. We'll be back next Thursday with more Inside Intercom.
This is Inside Intercom.